We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
与えるとき成長する。
We grow when we give.
Welcome to ROG, Return on Generosity, a podcast celebrating generosity at work. Not financial giving, giving valuable time, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration.
Our special guest today is Scott Mann, the president of Rooftop Leadership, a leadership consulting and training company and co-founder of The Hero's Journey, a 501c3 dedicated to helping veterans and military families find their voice and their story as they transition out of military service. As a former Army Green Beret with multiple combat tours to Afghanistan and Iraq, Scott takes the lessons from working in low-trust conflict zones to help leaders find ways to build relationships and tell stories that bridge the human trust gaps that we all face today. Scott has appeared on numerous TV, radio, and podcast media platforms, including CNN, Fox, and now ROG. Scott is also a playwright and actor, currently bringing his award-winning play, Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. We're going to hear more about that today. He's bringing it to life as a major film. It was released on 9/11 and a national release on Veterans Day 2021. It's still in performance now. We'll talk about that today. But what I appreciate most about you, Scott, a very long list of things, is your service, both as a veteran and as a humanitarian. I'm so deeply grateful to have you here on the show. Welcome to ROG.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. It's so cool to be here.
Thanks. It's great to have you here too.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your background. Where does somebody like a Scott Mann originate?
Well, let's see. I grew up in, my dad was a forest ranger, so we kind of moved all over, but they're from Western North Carolina up in the mountains. And I did most of my growing up in Arkansas in a little logging town, Mount Ida. And it was a great little town. Didn't even have a stoplight, less than 1,000 people, 36 people in my graduating class.
Whoa.
But for me is I met a Green Beret when I was about 14. His name was Mark. He had come home on leave and just was really struck by how he carried himself and just there was something about him that I knew it's what I wanted to do, and I didn't even know what he did. And he took the time to sit out with me and explain to me what a Green Beret was and what they did and how they were different than SEALs and Rangers, and that those guys are really good at kicking doors and doing a surgical strike, whereas Green Berets work by, with, and through indigenous people and build relationships and then do door kicking. So I just thought that was the coolest thing. And at 14, really, it became like an obsession for me, particularly since I was a kind of a runt and pretty bullied. I knew that's what I wanted to do. So, for the rest of my time in high school and all the way through college, just completely obsessed with becoming a Green Beret.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that background. And just for our listeners who aren't clear on the differences of the different areas, would you mind just saying a little more?
Well, I mean, you see a lot in the movies, right? And you read a lot of books and stuff and on streaming about the different elite units. And I think they've been highly celebrated over the global war on terror over the last 20 years. And I think it's easy to get this image of that they're all kind of the same thing. The Delta Force, the SEALs, the Rangers, they are designed to go in on targets and strike those targets with extreme lethality, very surgically, on and off target very quick, and they usually do the mission themselves. Green Berets are capable of doing that, but really ever since World War II, they evolved from a group of advisors that parachuted into occupied France and Belgium and other places and basically worked with partisans who were resisting the Nazis. They trained them, they recruited them, they advised them and showed them how to stand up for themselves and then fought alongside them. They've been doing that ever since. Ever since 1952, Green Berets have been dropping into places in little 12-person teams that most of us don't even know exist. And they build social capital and relationships with indigenous people. And then they help them stand up on their own from the inside out. And that's their specialty. And that's what I spent most of my adult life doing and just working around some of the finest both combat warriors and humans on the planet.
There's so much crossover between what you have done in your career and just for any leader who is aiming to influence people. One of the things that I'm picking up on what you're saying about how you literally you work with and you create a community with Indigenous folks, you must have trained on how to build trust
Yeah.
quickly, right? So, what are some of the ways that you have found work?
Well, first of all, I think it comes down to the old Sun Tzu. He was a Chinese philosopher and warrior. He said, "Know the enemy, know yourself, and you'll never lose in 1,000 battles," or something like that. It was close to that. And I really do think there's something about knowing the enemy, knowing yourself. And so for us in special forces, we would get dropped into an area where it might have been at war for 40 years. So you can imagine the low trust that's there, the division, the disconnection, and the distraction that these people are going through. And so you get in there and you're sitting across from this old man that's tickling the trigger of his AK-47 while he's sipping his tea, and it's real easy to think that's the enemy, right?
Right.
But I had some great mentors that taught me that's not the enemy. The enemy is actually, in this case, of course, the enemy that you're fighting, which is the Taliban or Al Qaeda. But it's this unique set of social conditions that you've been dropped into. That's the enemy, and you've got to figure out a way to navigate that. What I call the churn that I talk about in my book, Nobody's Coming to Save You. That's the enemy, and then make a connection with that person like your life depends on it. Well, it's no different in America or the West. I mean, it's easy to think the enemy, particularly nowadays, is the Republican or the Democrat that's sitting across from you. But that's not the enemy. Our enemy is not our neighbor. I don't care what their political affiliations are. Like that's not an enemy. An enemy is someone that you look at with contempt, and that's not what we should be looking at our neighbors with. I mean, we might have political disagreement or a civil discourse, but that's not contempt. And so you have to figure out, okay, that's this churn that's around me here. How do I navigate that and build trust in spite of that? That is, I think, what leaders are up against today. And it makes it so novel and so challenging and frankly so hard. It's not just a matter of building trust like our parents had to do. We've got this unprecedented set of social conditions, Shannon, that are making it nearly impossible.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things you recommend that we do?
Okay, so the first one I always talk about is the second part of knowing yourself, right? So I call it the human operating system. Is no matter how much the churn pulls at us with distraction and disengagement and distrust, there's a certain primal reality to how humans operate the world, and if we know that, we can pull those and leverage those innate drivers. Like, for example, the acronym I use is we are meaning-seeking, emotional, social storytellers who struggle. In other words, we're a mess, right? So as a leader, as a parent, as a coach, I really want to make sure that I'm integrating meaning and purpose into everything that I do. If I'm not clear on my why or my purpose, it's a really good chance that no one else is going to be, that my kids won't be. Emotion. We're the most emotional creatures on the planet, yet we push our emotions down. We don't have emotional access. And if you look at emotional temperature all around us today, it's in the red. People are almost in a primal state all the time. So I have to really manage emotional temperature in such a way that the other party's ready to listen to me. I mean, that's a big one for trust. It's a new step almost in trust building is we can no longer assume the other party's ready to listen to what we have to say because they're in such an emotional state. So I need to bring their emotional temperature down. And then the final one I would just throw out, there's more, but the third one, to answer your question, I think is storytelling. I think we've lost our way in our ability to use storytelling in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually what people are hungry for. We're hungry for leaders and parents and teachers who are storytellers and who can, because it creates psychological safety and connection, and it gives us a shared future and shared vision. It always has. And we've just lost that skill. It's gone dormant, but it's still within us. And so that's my goal in life now at the ripe age of 56, is to just kind of pour myself into leaders who want to reclaim those skills.
Yes.
And kind of bridge that churn and establish trust when most people are just thrashing around.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. So helpful for us to think about what are some of the practical things we can do, like to build trust and to tell stories. There's a lot of your work that you have made available to us in your books, in your your screenplay and your film production, and now in this leadership academy that we will talk about. But I think it's easy to say, what are the 15 things, but you're saying like, here, focus on these few, and try to make progress incrementally.
Yeah, I am. And let me just go a little bit further on those three. So let's take meaning, emotion, and storytelling, right? So for meaning, what I would say a tangible thing to do like right now is to really get clear on why you show up and do what you do every day, and where does that come from in your life. Go sit somewhere and write that for 5 minutes, because most of us have not done that lately. And I found that if we understand why we do what we do, if we just take a run at it, and then we think about where it comes from in our life, there's a certain click that happens, a certain alignment when we're like, oh, and we just kind of get reconnected to our purpose. And we're meaning-seeking creatures, so that is a big deal. Second one, on emotions, what I would say is really get in the habit of assessing the emotional temperature of every room you walk into, right? Like it's a thermometer.
Yeah.
And if people are in the red, if you're in the red, which means you're kind of almost like you're angry or afraid, you need to take some action, mostly breath, that will bring that down into the blue, where you're in more of a calm state, right? And that's our job as leaders. We've got to do that. And then the final one I would say is storytelling. How about this? Maybe it's not the stories we tell in low trust situations, but the stories that we ask to hear. I have found that leaders, parents, coaches, teachers who can ask thoughtful, open-ended questions that start with what and how in times of low trust are the ones who can usually bring the emotional temperature down and own a room really quickly. So there's some tactical ones to
practical.
try.
Yes, thank you for that. We need that. We really do. And I totally agree with the what hows. I always think of them as windshield questions, like going forward, versus the why questions are the rear view mirror kinds of questions. So, how are we engaging people? So talking about storytelling, for those of you who are joining us on YouTube, you'll see that Scott is wearing a silly band on his right wrist. For those of you joining us audio only, take my word for it. But there's a lot of meaning, meaning making storytelling about that particular thing that's on your wrist. Tell us a little more.
Well, the original silly band that was from I have 3 boys, and my youngest son, Braden, they grew up with the global war on terror. And my youngest son, Braden, gave me, remember when the kids used to wear all those silly bands on their wrists?
Oh, yeah. You can get them at the Hallmark store, I remember.
Yeah. And they were in the shape of different things. He had a baseball player silly band that was his favorite. He was always been a big baseball player, and he gave it to me before I deployed on one of my deployments, and it was his favorite. And he called it. When he gave it to me, he said, "This is a magic silly band. It'll keep you safe." And so it became a very special thing. And after I got out of the military and had a very, very tough transition, a very dark transition, I really struggled. Almost took my own life at one point. And it was storytelling. Honestly, some mentors who introduced me to storytelling as a modality for healing and as a modality for kind of reaching other people and taking one's lived experiences and putting them into the service of others, particularly our struggles. I call it the generosity of scars. And one of my coaches, I started speaking from the stage. It really helped me. It helped me to just kind of reclaim my agency, but I think it allowed me to bring experiences forward that help other people on human connection. But one of my coaches really pushed me hard to write a play. He thought, because he had written a play about his journey to the NFL, and he just said it would really be good for you to write it, and kind of like no one would ever see it. So I just did a little 5-minute scene with the silly band, and I told the story as the silly band from the stage. And I did it at a little community theater, and it really landed with the audience. And this was like 2015 or 2016. And in the talk back afterwards, people said, "Man, that's a play. That's a real play." So I thought, okay, well, I just kept moving the pen. I found that it was cathartic, and I thought it's kind of neat. I'd never written a play. So, at some point it started to take form. People came into my life and helped me. And at some point it really took shape. I had read Gary Sinise's book, grateful American, and he had talked about doing a play called Tracers right after Vietnam. Now, Gary never served, but it was with Vietnam veterans in the play. And I thought, okay, well, there's precedent for this. We could do this. And then to like complete my midlife crisis, Shannon and I went to New York and started studying acting for about a year off and on, and decided to be in the play, recruited the cast myself, all veterans, and we performed the play. And it's about a Green Beret sergeant that's based on 3 friends that I lost in combat as a composite character, his wife and his son, and he's trying to navigate the 20-year war. And it's all based on true stories. And and so we performed it for the first time in Tampa, Florida in 2018 on Veterans Day. We couldn't get a theater, so we did it in the Marriott, and we rented our own lights and sounds. And I think 300 people came to bear witness to my midlife crisis, and it did pretty well. We ended up touring the country, and then we made it into a film. We raised the money and put it on Amazon Prime. And then after Pineapple Express happened and the Afghanistan collapse, believe it or not, Gary Sinise saw the film and then decided to produce it and put it on tour all through 2023. So it's been quite a crazy run for, an old soldier that has never really written a play or acted.
Oh my gosh, there's so many stories about that story that I'm curious to learn more about. Just, how you got there, the experience of you writing that, the experience of you being in it, the kind of feedback you're getting from your audiences, like so many different things, the kind of experience that the veterans that were now a part of this, like what was their healing like. So any additional context you want to provide for us would be appreciated.
Oh man, I tell you. Well, I tell you one thing I'll do, but just don't let me forget, is I'll send you the link so it's on Amazon Prime, and all the proceeds go to our nonprofit. But I'll send you the link before people watch it on Prime or go see it live. It is touring. I recommend watching the little 30-minute documentary. We went behind the scenes with the first tour in 2019, Shannon, and we put 28,000 miles on a U-Haul van. And we went to Santa Barbara, Vermilion, South Dakota, Brandon, Mississippi, New York. It was crazy. And we filmed the whole thing with a professional filmmaker. And it's won all kinds of awards. It's only like 30 minutes, but it's called A Voice Never Heard. And so you'll see behind the scenes, literally me going to acting classes, kind of questioning out loud what the heck I'm doing. And then more importantly, you see behind the scenes interactions with Gold Star families and crowds and soldiers. It just really is uplifting. But to your point, I think a couple things come to mind about specific memories. I think the first one is I had such imposter syndrome for this. I had such imposter syndrome. I felt so like, what am I doing? And the first night we did it especially, because I thought, man, all my buddies are going to watch this and they're just going to be embarrassed, and I'm going to embarrass, the regiment. I'm not an actor. It's all that stuff. You know how
all that
stuff.
Head trash is what I call it.
Yeah. So I got it where we did the play, and when it was over, we kind of stood there, and I thought, oh my God, there was nothing. And then all of a sudden the place went nuts. And so we sat down and we do talkbacks after every show, and we sit down on the actors blocks, and all the actors are veterans or military family members. And so the audience is talking, and they're just, it's going 90 miles an hour back and forth, so much energy.
Wow.
At one point, this young man stood up and he said, my name's Ryan. My dad was a Marine, and he said, I lost him this year. And he said, this play helped me see him again tonight. And that was like, I looked at my wife, Monty, and we were like, we had spent so much money on this play, invested a lot of our own savings, and wondering if it was worth it. And I looked at her, and without even thinking about it, I just jumped off the stage and went and, gave this kid a big hug, and it set in motion this whole different thing that would happen after every show. The other thing that happened that was we never expected it, was we went to Brandon, Mississippi, which was our second stop on the tour. Okay. And a lady named Jenny contacted me, and she said on Facebook Messenger, she said, and we were at this time we had no money. Like, we're going off in a U-Haul van to do this thing, and it's going to be in the Brandon High School cafeteria. That's where we're doing the play. And she's like, I'm so excited you're coming to Brandon. My son, Jason, was a Marine. He died in Iraq, and he went to Brandon High School, and I've got something I want to give you. can I come to the show early? And I thought, oh my goodness, like this was our first true Gold Star mom, you know. So
Yeah.
she showed, and I had the cast come out on the stage. The whole tour team came out on the stage, and we stood around this prop called the Wall of Honor, which is a multi-shelf system that's the central prop in the play that Danny and his son put trinkets on. And Jenny started telling us about Jason, and you know, she was telling his story. And she goes, I'm so tired of people walking on eggshells with me as a Gold Star mom. Everybody walks on eggshells and treats me like I'm, you know, like I'm damaged goods. She goes, I want to talk about my son. I want to scream my son's name to the heavens, you know, and you guys are telling his story. So she gave us his dog tags. And so we hung them on the wall and we filmed that, and that became like a tradition that we did in every tour stop. 32 cities we go to, and the families of the fallen come in. We let them know we're coming, and we do a
Oh,
special
wow.
ceremony for them before the show, and they present, you know, totems from their loved ones' lives as far back as Vietnam, even
Wow.
Korea. Yeah,
Oh
and
my.
um, I'll show you this. I think it'll work.
I
Watch
want to
this.
see it.
I know. So in my podcast, this is probably very unorthodox, but in my podcast studio, we retired the original Wall of Honor.
Oh, wow.
So it sits behind me, but look at all the stuff on it now.
Oh my gosh. Y'all need to look at this on YouTube. Oh my heavens. Really?
Every one of those is a story and a loved
Wow.
one.
Oh my gosh, Scott.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a treasure.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
So
And
I
how
went,
you lifted those stories back up and you honored them and they felt a part of it.
yeah, it's just the neatest thing. And that didn't come from me. That came from another place, higher power.
Oh yeah.
I
Don't you
can't
think
take
a lot
credit
of
for any
this
of that.
does, Scott? I mean, come
All
on.
of
This
it.
is like
All of it.
but, you know, how often do we get the call and we don't answer it? You know, we
Yeah,
like send it to voicemail, but you answered these calls and you are doing this work.
that's something I talk a lot about in my stuff is that tap on the shoulder when we get it. Because
Mhm.
the tap on the shoulder normally is going to come followed with some pretty severe imposter syndrome or some kind of resistance that we talk ourselves out of it. You know,
Right.
it doesn't just come as an opportunity. It comes with a whole lot of baggage around it and all the reasons to say no.
Yeah.
Ready made, wrapped in a
I don't
bow.
have the time. I don't have the money. I don't have I mean,
Yeah.
look at you all in a U-Haul van going
Yeah.
across the country performing in high school. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you find a way,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
the way gets clearer and
Yeah.
wider. But you know, it's not like you started out that way, right? It wasn't like
It's,
some Hollywood director was like, "Hey, you know what, Scott? I think it would be great for you to come and film this."
it's so
You made
funny.
it.
It's so funny. Somebody said to me, like, you're so lucky, you know, to have Gary Sinise sponsoring your tour. And I'm like, I'm lucky. Yeah. Yeah. It only took 6 years, right? And 28,000 miles on a U-Haul van.
Right.
But the other thing too, that here's, and this is, I think the so what to people that are maybe dialing into this is there's a biology to storytelling, right? And this is the stuff that we're starting to uncover. Like our grandparents knew that storytelling was great. Civil society has known that storytelling is the best way to bring warriors and first responders home. And frankly, for anybody to make sense of trauma or struggle, storytelling is an innate skill that is gifted to all of us to make sense of the world, right?
Mhm.
But what we know now through neuroscience is that there are some things that happen with storytelling that we never really understood. And it is like for leaders, it is the ultimate tool to navigate really hard problems. And I'll give you an example. When we did the play in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was this guy named Noe, and he was a special forces NCO. He came to the play Friday night, and you could tell he was really nervous. He had been retired a while. He could tell he'd been drinking. He was not looking forward to going through the show, but he did. And like afterwards, he stayed all the way until everybody was gone. He came up to me. He's like, wow. He goes, man, that was my life up there. Do you mind if I bring my wife tomorrow night? I'm like, absolutely. So he brings his wife and his kids the next night. We were in town for 3 days. By Sunday afternoon, the matinee, his whole extended family is in the audience, right? Watching the show. He's watched it 3 times now, but here's the kicker. In the talkback, his sister stands up. And she said, you guys have just shown me in 2 hours what my baby brother has been trying to tell me for 5 years.
Mm.
And that is, I believe, is the power of storytelling that has nothing to do with the military, nothing to do with trauma. It is the only vehicle available to us for communications that can help us make sense of things in a way that hits us in the chest cavity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we're not using it.
Yes. And I think the return on generosity, the way I've witnessed your body of work, is you had to expose yourself to those feelings and those stories and go back and go deep and remember those brutal moments that you have experienced firsthand, the friends and loved ones that are no longer with us, and found a creative way to give it to us. And I believe you did that as an act of service, but now what I'm hearing you say is how much it poured back into you, right?
Yeah, there's definitely there's a reciprocity that's in the other party, but then there's also, and even Dr. Joan Rosenberg, psychiatrist out of LA, has said that storytelling heals the brain. It actually unifies the left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, and it brings them in alignment. Because again, the brain is a metaphorical pattern matching organ. It uses story to make sense of things, and so we the problem is in our society today we don't use story, we push it down. Now, here's the other thing too, is that like when I talk about my mental health, or I talk about things that I went through in transition or whatever, the reality is every story, if you look at, I mean, look at Shakespeare, look at the Odyssey, every story all the way back to, Gilgamesh, they all have they have certain components that the brain looks for. One of the main ones is struggle. There's no getting around it. Struggle is the universal singular. It's a biological necessity, as Daniel Coyle says. So no struggle, no story. And what most people are trying to do today when they go online or when they put their product out there or when they talk about whatever they do, it's 3 ways to be great like me. And there's no struggle, right? And it's unwatchable. The only other thing I would say about it is I'm not asking anybody to go back and conjure up trauma or re-immerse yourself in trauma or re-expose yourself. This isn't exposure therapy. When I say generosity of scars, generally a scar is a blemish on the skin, right? So it's healed, but that scar's still there and it still has certain sensitivities to it. That's what I'm talking. I'm not talking about going back to an open wound. That requires you working on yourself, therapy. But if you can take the scars, the things that scuffed you up in life, and you can go back to those and uncover the stories around them and what you learned and how you changed, man, like there's no ceiling for what you can do.
Right. And how that can also help others see their own stories. And you talked about there's 2 kinds of scar stories. You mind explaining those?
Yeah. So it goes back to, and when I said even the open wound, right? The odds are that's probably, if you can resolve that story with therapy or help, that's probably one of the most powerful stories you could put into the world. So just because we have deep trauma and stories that are unresolved, I think we should still resolve them, because oftentimes those are the very stories that can really help people. Setting that aside, the 2 best stories that are like scar stories that can be repurposed in the service of others, the second best story is the story you don't want to tell anybody else. And the very best scar story is the story you don't want to tell yourself. Talking about my suicidal ideation, that happened in 2015 in a closet in my bedroom. I never talked about it until 2019. I never talked about it to my wife or my kids. And I had just lost another friend to suicide. I was about to do my 3rd TED Talk, weeks away. And I said, I'm not doing that topic. I want to do this topic. And for the first time, I had to share that with my wife, my kids. It was pretty uncomfortable. But what has happened with that talk since then, it's got, I think, over 1 million views on YouTube. And it also, they use it now in a lot of the transition briefings to special operators who are coming out, that talk. So it serves, right? And it serves in a way that I never imagined. It was a very uncomfortable, and it still is, to go to that place. But Brene Brown calls it, vulnerability. And I think that's okay. I prefer to think about it because a lot of people get uncomfortable with the vulnerability word. It's just being relatable, just being relatable to the other party. And that means taking some of the body armor off and talking about that moment in life when you were a young associate and you made a big mistake. and it almost cost you your job, or it cost the company this amount of money, and have that conversation with the employee across from you that just screwed up.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Or your kid that's struggling with addiction right now. That's what I think people are hungry for these days with our leaders, and with or without titles, is the ability to repurpose our own struggles in the service of other people through our storytelling. And instead of trying to put on some kind of represented face, that's just BS.
Yeah, that's all polished up.
Yeah,
and
nobody
airbrushed.
likes polish.
No. And when you said before about the practical advice of just sitting down and like asking yourself those deeper questions, start to jot out your own story, maybe even as if you were writing a play that nobody was ever going to watch. Because I think that's important, right? Because if we think about it as, having an audience, you automatically think about being judged. But if you're saying, I'm doing this for my own journey, my journey within.
I hear it all the time. People say, the three big ones are, I don't have a story. My story's not as good as hers, and nobody wants to hear my story. Right? Those are the three.
Yeah.
The fact, and so let's just dispense with that right now. One, you actually, the brain is a metaphorical pattern matching organ. So in other words, the brain uses metaphor to make sense of the world, which is story. So you're right. You don't have a story. You have about 5 million stories. Second is, my story's not as good as hers. Remember that's not how stories actually work. Stories are not a competition. That's what speakers do, right? Speakers think that way. Storytellers don't think that way. Storytellers put their stories out there for the audience, not for themselves.
To serve, right?
That's right. And so in that sense, the rule we want to use there is what's personal is universal, right? So that's a really, really important thing to remember. And it feels weird, but if it's personal to you, it doesn't have to be epic. It doesn't have to be traumatic. If it's personal, I mean, my story is about a Green Beret walking into a soda shop. That's not epic, right? But it's personal to me, so it has universal value to others. People locate themselves in that story, and they go, I had a mentor like that, and it just helps make sense. And then the final one is, nobody wants to hear my story. Quite the opposite. They just did a study, David Phillips, called Death by PowerPoint, where he hooked people up to EEG machines and measured brain activity during PowerPoint. And he found that your audience on average forgets 90% of your content 30 seconds after you say thank you for your time. So everybody wants to hear your story. Like, people don't want to hear PowerPoint. They don't want to hear talking points. They're tired of it. They don't want to hear 3 ways to be great like me. They want a storyteller who's been scuffed up, who can stand in their own struggle and just put it out there, right? In the service of the people that they lead. And I think that was what you asked me about was the reluctance, because those are the things that we have to tell ourselves. Oh, I know what it was. When you start your story, life happens in moments, right? Life is specific, not general. So where a lot of people, they struggle with their story. What's my story? That's not the question to ask. You'll never arrive at your story that way. Life happens in moments. We live life moment to moment, right? So go back to a pivotal moment in your life that was pivotal. Like, where if you looked back on that moment in your life, you would say, that changed the direction of my life. It might be a good moment. It might not be traumatic, but take that moment and then literally describe it and build out what happened and the journey and what you went through and what you learned and how you changed. And you've got you've got a great story.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And I want everyone listening to do that. It's such a great exercise. And share your stories, because we do want to hear them.
We do. And we need them.
Well, we have Van Damone to thank for knowing each other. So thank you, Van, for that.
She's really cool.
She knows you because of your hero's journey that you co-founded. And I'd love for you to share more about that. She shared some of it on her ROG episode, but I'd love to hear it from yours.
Well, thank you. Aren't relationships just the coolest thing?
They're the coolest thing.
I just love it, and how it just keeps going, and the wonderful people you meet through human connection. But yeah, so one piece of news I would say, so I founded the Hero's Journey after my mental health journey, and really my arrival into storytelling. I was so enamored with it that my wife and I, and Monty is my wife, we've been married 29 years.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Oh, that's amazing.
And she's the one that really picked me up off the floor in those dark times and has just been my partner through all of that. So we founded a nonprofit called The Hero's Journey. And we started just by doing storytelling workshops. In my backyard in Florida, I would work with trauma, veterans and family members, that Gold Star families that had been through trauma. And I thought, well, I'm just going to teach them how I learned how to tell my story. And I was taught by some really stellar people. Plus, at this point, I'm obsessing over it like any good Green Beret, and I'm studying storytelling like a fiend. And I'm studying with indigenous storytellers, and so now I'm
deep dive.
And I'm pouring myself into these individuals, and sometimes one at a time. But the thing I would always try to do is I'd always have a psychologist or a counselor with me, so that they were safety and they could go on into it. And so we got pretty good at it. Started running workshops, and then I wrote the play somewhere around 2018. And so the nonprofit we would go to a town, do the play, and then the next day we would do the story. We call it the play, our emotional breaching tool. And then we would run the story workshop with Gold Star moms teaching it. We'd have a firefighter from 9/11 or a EMT. We have wounded veterans, and it's so cool because we've taught this to Gold Star families, families of suicide, combat wounded, first responders, and even sometimes we'll have Vietnam veterans and Global War on Terror veterans working together,
Wow.
to exchange. It's crazy. But what happened was we're still doing that. We're still doing storytelling workshops. We've changed our name, though, from the Hero's Journey to Task Force Pineapple.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And the reason was I kind of prayed about it over the summer, but I have found myself, Shannon, doing so much work since the Afghanistan withdrawal. I've been doing a lot of advocacy work for our own veterans and their families who have had such a moral injury from the way the war ended, and they're going through a whole new set of challenges. And I've really found it my life's purpose to be loud about what they're going through to our policymakers and politicians who ushered in on both sides of the aisle such a terrible policy in Afghanistan and have done irreparable harm to a generation of warfighters and frankly put the nation at risk in ways that are inexcusable. And our allies are still completely flapping in the wind. So we've added that, I just believe that we are at a new place with our global war on terror veterans in particular, 1.8 million of those folks that fought a 20-year war. That war is over. And most of the nonprofits that are out there formed during that period. And we're saying we need kind of a new nonprofit focus on what we're going through now. What we have to offer to the nation now. We aren't a bunch of victims. Like, these are wonderful problem solvers, but we got to help them move through a few things. And we feel like storytelling is a big way to do that. So I say all that to tell you we're still doing the plays, we're still doing the workshops, but we're using those as vehicles to educate Americans, educate politicians, hold them accountable, while simultaneously doing the healing modality with our military community. And storytelling's still at the heart of it, but we've just kind of taken on a national mission as Pineapple, because that was the name of the group that got folks out, at least from our neck of the woods. And I think it resonates with people. And so we're going to just let that be our banner from here on out.
Oh, congratulations on that. That's a big shift. It sounds like a lot of introspection, and your dedication and commitment to these individuals and these stories, and how, what role can you play in what comes next? Because what happened, and you're just like, okay, here's the now and the future. How are we influencing that?
Right. And not handing it off to our next generation of warfighters who are our children. We've got, for example, you can't blame this on one party in the sense of abandonment, because we actually have a multi-generational habit of abandoning our allies. It goes all the way back to the Montagnards in Vietnam. And, we can't keep doing that. We cannot keep doing that. And the only way that we're going to, for two reasons. One, we have to educate civilians and politicians that is not acceptable policy, because you put our soldiers at risk and you harm them mentally and morally. But also you put the mission at risk when you do that, because people don't trust our soldiers now. They don't trust our Green Berets. So now this Green Beret is much more at risk when he goes into a rough area, because now building trust, you've made it harder for him. Because when he says, "Sir, I just need you to trust me," and he goes, "Oh, you mean like the Afghans trusted you?"
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That's a tough place to be for a young operator. So
Mm-hmm.
we believe that we have an inherent duty to help civilians, citizens, politicians understand those kind of aspects of modern war, and that it's not a Fortnite game. Like this is,
Yeah.
if we're going to
Real
send
life.
yeah. So anyway, we're really, really doubling down on the storytelling
Mm-hmm.
as a modality for healing, but also education.
And that you're shifting it because, it was the last out Elegy of a Green Beret, and now it's Pineapple Express.
So,
Correct?
the task, so it's Task Force Pineapple is our nonprofit,
Okay.
and then we have 3 programs underneath it. Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret, which is the play.
Okay.
The Hero's Journey storytelling program.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third program that we've added most recently, we haven't even talked about it, is we call it the Gathering Storm, but it's helping civilians understand and politicians. Unfortunately, we're not done with terrorism yet. This stuff is still out there, and the way we left Afghanistan, it's come here now, and we've got to start waking up to it.
What's the
So
third part called, Scott?
the Gathering Storm.
The Gathering Storm. Okay.
Yeah, and it's basically just veterans who have been talking to our Afghan allies for 4 years, sharing what we're hearing from them, and it's very scary. Like what our allies who are still in Afghanistan, they see what Al Qaeda is doing, they see what the Taliban are doing, they see what ISIS is, and they're warning us. And
Mm-hmm.
it's we're very close to an imminent attack here at home, and no one's talking about it. And
Okay.
for our generation of veterans, Shannon, who were went to war on 9/11, we swore never again. That is not going to happen on our homeland again. And here we are 20 some years later, and we are literally pre 9/11 again. So again, this is one of those weird things I never thought I would be doing with the nonprofit. But when I looked around this summer, and I thought, man, I can't deal with another attack on the U.S. soil and not having tried to at least mobilize the voices of the veterans who fought this war to warn our people here at home. So
Right.
again, we use storytelling, we use the play, we use the talkbacks. We've got a book coming out called The Gathering Storm that's just written
Good.
to help civilians and communities know how they can prepare for another 9/11. And it's not a Chicken Little thing, but I mean, we've dealt with these guys for 20 years. We know what they are, and it's definitely here. So
when that book is released, Scott, I'd love to have you back
you
to
bet.
share about it.
You
Yeah,
bet.
I
Yeah,
think that's
thank you.
important. How else can our listeners engage with and support the work you're doing?
If folks just go to tfpineapple.org, I tell you, we operate on a really, really shoestring budget, and so any help helps us put the play on the road. It helps us get Gold Star families in workshops. So just donations to tfpineapple.org. Any amount helps. Really grateful for that. Go to Amazon Prime and watch Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. 100% of the proceeds go to Pineapple. And if you can, come to a live play. If you go to lastoutplay.com or just scottmann.com, you can find locations for the play dates.
Okay. All of that will be in the show notes, everyone. So please take a look there to engage more. I mean, this is really important work, life-saving work, and, preventative work, ideally. So thank you for the willingness to do it.
I appreciate it. And one of the things I say at the end of my Pineapple Express book, I mean, for a bunch of veterans who were done with the war for the most part, and we found our allies were on the run, and the government was not going to do anything, we decided that we weren't good with that, and we were going to try to get as many out as we could, and honor that promise. That was our Pineapple Express, right? But I try to challenge people across the country. That, in my opinion, is just one example of what we're capable of as citizens, as members of a community. That there's never been a time in my assessment for us to mobilize and get bottom up stuff done. If you look around, there's some really great bottom up things happening. I mean, even your podcast as an example of what Van's doing. The way that we can build communities and mobilize people to action at a grassroots level is frankly unprecedented. And I tell people, like, what's your Pineapple Express? Figure out what it is, and if it scares you, that's the thing you need to do.
That's probably it. Yeah, you're probably So would you mind doing a couple rapid fire questions, Scott?
Let's do it.
Okay. Just for fun, what is one of your favorite songs?
Um, Sunshine on My Shoulder, John Denver.
Oh, what a great song. Wow. Best or worst advice you've ever been given?
Best advice I've ever been given is leave tracks from my father.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst advice that I've ever been given was from a former Army officer who told me to make sure I look out for myself because nobody else will.
Mm. Wow. Contrast.
Mm.
What never fails to make you laugh?
What never fails to make me laugh, The Villain with Kirk Douglas.
Okay. I've never seen it.
You haven't seen it?
I'm watching it this weekend.
It's like a real world Bugs Bunny coyote cartoon for an hour and a half.
It just cracks you up. Oh my God.
I can't even watch the credits without.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
And my wife will just sit there and just stare at me like there's really something wrong with you. Like she won't even laugh, but I'm just like in the floor. Yeah.
Well, you've talked a lot about stories. What is one of your favorite stories to tell?
Oh, what a great
You
question.
probably have a lot of them. So it's not your only favorite, but one of your favorites.
I love telling Romy Camargo's story. He is the Green Beret. His episode's on my podcast, but he was a Green Beret who was shot in the neck and in Afghanistan, and basically it's a miracle he's still alive. But he's a ventilator dependent, quadriplegic, and found a way to not only get back in the game, but he and his wife Gabby, who kissed for the first time at 14 years old in Venezuela, opened a spinal cord injury rehabilitation center, the only one in the world like it in Tampa. And I got to be with them pretty much every step of the way on that. From the time I was sucking saliva out of his mouth with a hose in the hospital at Walter Reed to, the grand opening of cutting the ribbon. Like it's my favorite story in the world to tell.
All right. I'm going to put a link to that episode in our show notes. You'll get more subscribers anyway, just because I think people want to hear all your episodes. But that one I'll highlight because I want to hear the details.
Thank you.
What do you think is a key to living a good life and leaving your tracks, as your father so beautifully taught us?
I think it really is. The key to living a good life is a long breath instead of a short breath. When my father-in-law Ben passed, we were all in the ICU with him, and we were just listening to him take his final breaths. And what I noticed was, there were these long breaths, like really long. They weren't labored; they were long breaths, and you could almost feel like he was taking in everything as he inhaled, and then letting go as he exhaled. And it just really struck me that, like, in our final moments, the quality of our breath, and we can't always take that long breath, but I'm speaking metaphorically here. If you can just, if you're, it's just those breaths to just take in a life well lived, and an exhale of no regrets, and that's what he was doing, and I could just feel it. And I've been in the presence of men and women who didn't leave this world that way, with that type of breathing, and I think it's a very real thing. So for me, I want to leave this world with long, slow breaths and no regrets.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Well, thank you so much for investing this time with us, for sharing your thought leadership, for being who you are. I'm deeply grateful for you and celebrate you, and just want to continue to partner.
Yeah, thank you. And can I just throw out and I know we chatted briefly, but if folks are interested in continuing this connection work, I've opened a leadership academy that I'd love people to come check out. It's free. There's no charge for it. But it's a really cool community around. If this kind of stuff lights you up, we're building a really cool virtual community around it called the Scott Mann Leadership Academy.
Scott Mann Leadership Academy. And what kinds of things can they find there, Scott?
Pretty much everything we've talked about here, talking about the churn, getting more clear on how the churn shows up in your life, because that's really important. Understanding the human operating system better, meaning, emotion, social connection, storytelling, struggle, really getting the art and the science of that. And then starting to unpack the skill sets of active listening, storytelling, nonverbal physicality, and just breath work. How do you put those into play And it's a fun place to be. And we got people from all walks of life in there. But what unites us is just this obsession with human connection and social capital.
Amazing. I'm signing up. That's a 2025 commitment for me. You're
All
hearing
right.
it now.
All right.
So when we have you
Fantastic.
back, when your new book comes out, I'll tell you all the things that I did in your course.
Okay.
And we'll get to talk about this new body of work that you're putting out there. But again, thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you, Shannon. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for listening to ROG, Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.